Hello and welcome to the Leonardtown Arts and Entertainment Artist Spotlight. My name is Brandy Blackstone. I'm the Public Relations and Events Coordinator for the Commissioners of Leonardtown. I'm coming to you today from the St. Mary's County Arts Council. And on today's episode, we're featuring the life and work of American photographer Robert H. McNeill. Robert H. McNeill was a prolific American photographer who chronicled the Depression era of the 30s and 40s by capturing poignant moments of history, depicting social injustice, political movements, as well as the amazing culture and undeniable glamour of the period identified as the Harlem Renaissance. I'm joined today by Susan McNeill, family historian and daughter of Robert H. McNeill. Thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you for having me, Brandy. It's a delight. I've lived here for 27 years now in the county, and I never realized what my family connection was to St. Mary's County until shortly after my father died, when I started going through his estate, photographs and other memorabilia. And I realized that he did have a connection to the county, starting as far back as 1933, when his family came down to vacation in St. Mary's County. And I realized that Washington, and I'm from Washington, is not unconnected to the county, and that there are many Washingtonians and St. Mary's Countyans who have gone back and forth to Washington for employment, for entertainment, and that it was kind of really one big region.
Oh, how wonderful. So it is a natural connection to bring his art here.
It is.
And it's being featured throughout the month of February at the St. Mary's County Arts Council Gallery. And it's a wonderful show. We hope you can come by and take a look. So this isn't actually our first time
No.
starting this project. Just for our audience sake, we actually started back in 2021 during that year's Potomac and Jazz and Seafood Festival, where St. Clement's was featuring your father's work. And today we're going to show you some footage from that presentation that you did talking about his work. So of course the pandemic and life caused us to put the project on the side, but we're very happy to have you and to pick it up where we left off.
I'm happy to be back and to continue this project. I really started the project as an outgrowth of looking at his total collection. He began his photography around 1930, early 1930s, I would say, 31 to 33. As a teenager, in middle school and high school, when his aunt let him have a camera, he saw a photo demonstration of how the photography and the developing of the photography process worked at Dunbar High School, or formerly M Street High School in Washington, where there were a lot of African Americans who went on to in medicine, law, and many other fields in the Northeast, graduated from Dunbar. And his aunt, who was an English teacher at Dunbar High School, took her camera to the beach, messed it up, got sand in it, and she said, "You can have the camera if we can get the sand out of it." So he worked diligently to get the sand out of his camera because he was so excited about this photographic process. Sure. Now he grew up, I got to go back, he grew up in a family, and I think I went over that earlier. He grew up in a middle-class family. My granddad was a physician and doctor on the Howard University medical staff, and my grandmother, his mother, was a German teacher and ultimately was a member of the Board of Education, and she was very prominent. She was also kind of in the women's kitchen, what they call a kitchen cabinet of Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt. So yes, one of the things that I really prized seeing was an invitation to a luncheon of given by Mrs. Roosevelt during the years that they were in the White House. And so the family had some influence, but doctors didn't make much money, or Howard, so they weren't wealthy by any means. But they sent their kids to college, and my dad was the youngest, so he stayed and kind of was I think he was the favorite of my grandmother, and because she was always by his side, and he was always close. She wanted, and he would be the one to take care of them, Sure. So the other two kids went on to professional schools, one in social work, one in civil engineering, University of Pennsylvania, but he tried to go to Howard as a pre-med student, but I've retold this story. But he wasn't doing very well at pre-med. He wanted to please his father, my grandfather, but he really wanted to be a photographer. Sure. So my granddad said, okay, this was about 1935, 6, and so he said, okay, you can. I guess it was about 1936, 7. He said, okay, you can go to New York Institute of Photography and study photography, which was a year's course. Sure. So that's the period that we're dealing with here. That's actually kind of becoming one of my favorite periods of his photography, because it was a very vibrant, wonderful period of African American history, when even during the Depression, when things were ostensibly bad and people were unemployed, but yet there was this vibrance about African American life.
Right. It's amazing in researching when we started this project and picking it back up. It's amazing. I don't think a lot of people know about this period and what was termed the Black Renaissance, and even though some of the photography is out of the Black Renaissance period, but still, this is. Could you talk a little bit about?
Well, I think it's kind of a legendary period. Actually, I think we have to keep, as the generations go by, I think we kind of relearn about this. But it's a very popular period of from the early, the late teens and the early, just talking 1900 now. And the early 20s and through the 30s was the period of what is called the Harlem Renaissance, when there was a lot of artistic creativity and talent that emerged as a result of a migration from the South, as a result of a lot of the life in the cities of New York, Chicago, even Kansas City, when we're talking about music, New Orleans. All of these cities had a vibrant musical and artistic life, and they all kind of converged in New York. And this is where the so-called Harlem Renaissance developed. But even in the 1930s, later on, because of some of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's recovery programs, such as the WPA Writers Project, and my father did photography for that. Because of these programs to give creative people employment, a lot of talent came forth. James Baldwin, Zora Neale Hurston were able to have the money to write and do their seminal works that sometimes weren't published until a little bit later. So this was just such a fantastic time.
It's amazing. So you talk about that in the film, so let's take a look.
Hello, my name is Susan McNeill, and I'm here to introduce or reintroduce you to the images, the jazz images of my father, Robert H. McNeill, who was born in 1917 and who passed away in 2005. The St. Clements Museum graciously had them on exhibit during the 2021 Jazz Fest in St. Mary's County, and graciously left them up for a month so that those who hadn't had an opportunity to see them during the Jazz Festival would be able to see them now. And I'm going to take you on a tour of the images that are here. This image of my father is probably his most famous self-portrait, and it's the quintessential image of a news photographer. And he owned several different versions of a news service for the African American press. In fact, it's so iconic that the Washington Post used it as an image of a news photographer in one of their stories, not attributing it to him, but they thought this was the iconic image of a photographer. You can see in the image that he has his Speed Graflex camera, which was the workhorse camera of the 1930s, 40s, 50s news photographer. Even studio photographer used this, and the flash bulb. He has a famous story he used to like to tell about this image, that he and Mary McLeod, he went to an event with which headlined Mary McLeod Bethune and Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt, then the president's wife, the first lady. And the flash bulb burst and broke and went off and almost exploded, actually did explode. And the Secret Service came rushing up to him, asking him what happened. And he was very nervous about this and thought he would be pulled away and arrested or something. But he explained to the Secret Service folks and to the crowd that there was just too much personality in the room with Mrs. Roosevelt and Mary McLeod Bethune for one poor flashbulb to be able to tolerate. So that eased the tension in the room, and he went on to do his work. As I said, my father was born in 1917 to Dr. William C. McNeill and Mary Wheeler McNeill. My grandfather, his father, was a physician and part of the Howard University administration. He was the secretary treasurer of Howard University Medical School. His father had come up from North Carolina as a result of tensions in the South, and specifically there was what is called the Wilmington coup of 1898, which basically caused many African Americans to leave Wilmington. Wilmington, North Carolina, was a very progressive city. Its downtown area especially was very integrated, and this was not favored by the Ku Klux Klan, and so there was decided, a lot like what happened in Oklahoma, that this kind of congeniality among black and white had to stop. So there was a very now more famous incident in Wilmington, as I said. So he left Wilmington about just before the tensions were getting worse, and came north based upon a generous grant from a donor who wanted to see him progress in school. So he came to Howard University and came to sort of a prep school and became a physician when he matriculated from it. Was like a high school prep school, and matriculated or graduated from that prep school and entered Howard University Medical School. My grandfather met my grandmother sometime between 1910 and 1920 as a result of one of the physicians on the staff that kind of thought this would be a good match. My grandmother had graduated from Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts as a German instructor, and she taught German in the Washington, D.C. high schools. So as you can imagine, the family was middle class and had a lot of expectations of their three children, one being the only girl, Catherine, and the eldest son, who was William, who became an engineer, educated at the University of Pennsylvania, which he was probably one of the first African Americans to be educated in engineering at the University of Pennsylvania. But my father, unfortunately, was not interested in being one of, in the medical profession. He was interested, he was really trying. He went and tried a couple of years at Howard University in pre-med, but when my granddad saw his grades, he felt that after my father begging him to give him the money to go to photo school, he thought that would be the best use of his money rather than trying to follow up on the medical profession or one of the other professions. My dad really discovered photography at Dunbar High School, and he was fortunate enough to go to the very famous Dunbar High School, which received African American young people from across the East Coast who wanted to go to this particular distinguished school in Washington. It was really like a prep school for college for African American youth. And my father did photography at Dunbar High School, especially sports, and the drill team, the drilling, and the military, like Junior ROTC, was very, very strong in the high schools at that point. And he basically took photographs of these events and was given a camera of his own. His first camera came from my aunt, who was a teacher, by the way, an English teacher at Dunbar High School. So he was encouraged. If he could fix her broken camera, he could have the camera. And then he went on to really be interested in photography, and especially, again, after a chemistry lesson at Dunbar, which he was amazed by the photographic process, and thereafter worked very hard to go to the New York Institute of Photography, where he took some of the other pictures that I'm going to talk about.
In that segment, you talked about the Wilmington coup and what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Yes.
Can you explain for our members of our audience who may not be as familiar with those turbulent events what they were?
Well, Brandy, this was a very difficult period in our nation's history. I don't know as much about the Tulsa riot and massacre as much as I do about the Wilmington coup of 1898, because it affected my family. My grandfather's family was from North Carolina and lived in Wilmington. Now, my grandfather left to go to school just as this riot was taking place, a riot or coup, actually, because what happened was the white so-called citizens' councils, or even the Klan, of 2,000 men had taken the government back from an integrated town government. Blacks and whites could participate in both the political and economic life of Wilmington, North Carolina, which was a very progressive area for the time. Basically, the whites got kind of fed up and said, I'm not doing this, and basically took the government back from this integrated group of people and killed up to 300 African Americans in the process. Now, again, it's very sad, a very sad time. But what you have as a result of an incident like the Wilmington coup was that African Americans were migrating north, because this Reconstruction, the period of Reconstruction, which kind of brought the South back into the Union over a long period of time, to be elected to the Congress and to participate fully in the American experience was ending, and so African Americans saw the writing on the handwriting on the wall and started leaving the South in great numbers. And my granddad was one of those people who left just before the coup, but because you could see what was happening, and land was being taken back from African Americans at this time too. So, and basically they were my grandfather's family were farmers. And so that where you could see what was happening, you had to get out. And Washington was a very good place to come because even though there was segregation, it was a much more progressive time to participate in all aspects. And Howard University was kind of a hallmark of this participation in the economic and political life of more economic life of Washington, D.C.
So thank you for covering that. So your family did end up settling in D.C.
My grandfather's family not only settled in D.C., but he brought four of his siblings up to attend Howard University and go into the professions of pharmacy and education and dentistry. So it was quite a good time for them. My granddad then married my grandmother, who was from the North, and she was from an abolitionist background, and she had abolitionist ministers. So it was such an interesting marriage of two people, she from the North and from the Northern tradition, and he from the South and the Southern tradition. So
wonderful. It's astounding to think of what your grandparents and father were able to accomplish during difficult times like that. And just judging from that, the story he told about the flash bulb, it sounds like he knew how to diffuse difficult situations and make people feel at ease. And I think a lot of the first lawyers and the doctors and dentists, that's a skill that probably served them really well during those times. Is that something that you saw in your father often?
You had to be. African Americans have always had to be very adaptable, right? Because there were so many situations that you came upon where you were defending your own life, where you had to stay out of trouble. And so I think African Americans have developed what's they call code switching now, where your language is different based upon different situations, and your actions were often different based upon what situations you found yourself in. But my father, I think, was something a little bit more. He was a very personable individual. He studied acting at Howard University. I think he really wanted to be an actor. And he was a member of the Howard Players for as long as he was there at Howard. So it's something he really, really enjoyed. But obviously being from this medical, father was a doctor, mother was, a well-established teacher and Board of Education member. I'm sure they looked kind of askance on the acting profession, and not only that, but he had a little bit of stage fright that was difficult for him to overcome at times preparing for his roles. Photography he took his acting talent, I think, and his ability to be funny and land on his feet, and carried it over into his work as a photographer, where you have to prepare your subjects, relax them, make them comfortable. And one of the incidents that I referred to was this time that I guess you'd call it, was a kind of a news photographer. He went to an event with Mrs. Roosevelt and Mrs. Bethune, Mary McLeod Bethune, the well-known African-American women's leader. And I guess I would say she was an African-American leader, period.
Right.
With his camera, which was, many of you may remember seeing pictures of the photographer with the big flash camera, with the big flash stand that was slightly above the camera, and you'd insert the flash bulb. Well, I remember to tell the story that the flash bulb went off, and he had, a very funny thing to say to make everybody at ease, including the Secret Service,
Of course.
who were accompanying Mrs. Roosevelt. So that was how he kind of had that ability to read the room, to diffuse people and disarm them while he was taking pictures that carried over into that.
That's wonderful that he's able to do that. So you talked about his parents rather,
Yes.
encouraging him to go into a professional field, to become a doctor.
Well, they didn't actually do that. I must say. He says my granddad never said, "I want you to become a." He felt an obligation to kind of do that. The pressure of this achieving family, and at that time, being an artist or a photographer was a little bit outside of the norm. However, his aunt, my great aunt, was a well-known Harlem Renaissance artist who went to Europe, went to Paris to study, and her name was Laura Wheeler Waring. So I think there was artistic talent in the family, and I think that he kind of followed in the footsteps of his great aunt, who also loved him he was a cute little boy, and so who also loved him very much, and they encouraged this artistic talent in him, and never kind of told him, no, you can't do this.
Sure. Is this the same aunt that gave him the camera?
No, this was a different aunt. The aunt that gave him a camera was my Aunt Bertha, who was from my granddad's family, and Laura Wheeler Waring was from my grandmother's side, which was the northeastern side of the family.
So the women in the family were very influential on it.
I'd like to think so.